When you hear the phrase, so big, you might think of a baby's arms stretched upright. Today that phrase gets an addendum, so big quilt blocks, and I naturally want to spread my arms just to show you the size of the blocks. Debbie Bowles is the designer of 18-inch quilt blocks that are speedy to piece, but have great impact. Debbie, welcome to Sewing with Nancy.
Thanks, Nancy. I've always been drawn to the large fabric prints. And rather than cutting them up into small pieces all the time, I've designed some quilts that use 18-inch quilt blocks. The block is asymmetrical and it's turned and rotated within the quilt projects, creating drama and movement in all the sizes.
So big quilt blocks, that's what's coming up next on Sewing with Nancy.
Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, is made possible by Baby Lock, a complete line of sewing, quilting, and embroidery machines and sergers. Baby Lock, for the love of sewing. Madeira, specializing in embroidery, quilting, and special effect threads, because creativity is never black and white. Koala Studios, fine sewing furniture custom built in America. Clover, makers of sewing, knitting, quilting, and embroidery products for over 25 years. Experience the Clover difference. Amazing designs and Class A needles.
Debbie is a new Sewing with Nancy guest, and I've been drawn to her quilts and to her teaching skills because of the simplistic size, the streamlinedness, and I like the blocks that they're asymmetrical.
Thanks, Nancy. This is a huge, huge quilt block, 18 inches. There's a lot of kind of new quilters that would like to make a big bed quilt. And this is a great, simply a great project for them because you can see that the block is big. It's just a light, a dark, and a center square. But in this large quilt, what you're looking at is 30 different blocks, 5 different darks, 5 different lengths, and 30 centers.
It's a lot of blocks, but it goes together so quickly. And we want to show you how versatile this pattern and this design is that we're going to be showing you during this first program. So we have a little showcase to start. This is traditional cotton, but this next quilt is flannel.
Right, and flannel is such a wonderful product to use, but it does become kind of bulky when we do.
Sure.
This is a great block because there's not very many seams. So what you're looking at in this flannel lap-size quilt is 2 darks, 2 lights, and 4 different centers making the design.
We're going to be talking a lot about fabric choices during this 2-part series, so not to worry, we'll tell you how to do this. But then fabric choices for t-shirts, we're always getting inundated with questions on a t-shirt quilt, and this is a great one to use.
It is, because when we do think of t-shirts, most of the time our kids or our family members have been doing something active.
Right.
So it's fun to put them into a quilt where they're not just sitting there, they're actually moving around.
And it's not one block right after another, they're separated, and as you said, they have movement.
Yes.
Not only can you use non-traditional fabric like t-shirts and flannel and cotton, but you may also use a panel that so often you can buy pretty panels of fabric, but you can cut them up.
Right. And I think sometimes we as quilters, we get a little stymied. If it was printed as a panel, we want to use it as a panel. And this is a great pattern to cut up that panel, making dynamic center squares.
And you're wondering, how are you going to do this? Well, we'll be showing you exactly how to make this so big quilt block and how to choose the fabric, cut, sew, and how it all comes together next. Whether you're making a queen size, a twin, lap quilt, the so big quilt blocks are all made basically with 3 fabrics.
Yes, they are, Nancy. We always have a center square, and we always have a dark and a light. The quilt we saw earlier had 30 different fabrics for the center square, so you won't be really cutting strips for that. But for the frames, it is a strip cutting. It's a small strip and a larger strip, 2.5 and 4.5. So they get paired up and stitched together into a strip set, a large white and a 2.5-inch dark, and then a skinnier white and a dark. And then one strip is loose and not part of a strip set.
Like traditional quilting, when you have strip sets, is to stitch together with 1/4 of an inch seam allowances, which I'm doing here. At the end of the seam, you just butt the next strip set to the stitching and continue until you've stitched all of your strips.
Absolutely. It's very fast and easy sewing. Of course, you're going to be pressing them. We're going to press to the dark like we press most things when we quilt. And these will be long seams. They're going to go the full width of the fabric. So we want to make sure that we do it up and down motion, not a driving motion, because that will curve our strips eventually.
So everything's pressed to the dark side, the dark fabric, not the dark side.
The dark side.
And then we can do some sub-cutting, and we'll have the magic of another mat here. Debbie's going to start with the wider strip. We've already squared one end so that it was easy for her to begin.
So the wider strip is going to get cut into two different widths for the block. One is an 8.5-inch width, one is a 12.5-inch width. And if you were actually making a big quilt, Nancy, you'd probably cut your strip sets all of the 12s, 12.5 at one time, all the 8.5 at one time. I do like, for my larger quilt projects, to use a ruler set that is all from the same manufacturer, whether I'm cutting segments or trimming the block, simply because the pieces are so large that if they're off by a little bit from manufacturer to manufacturer, it can make a difference. So that's the larger sized piece we're going to cut. Then we have the smaller sized piece from the two strip sets with unequal strips. From these strips that are equal, we're going to cut 6.5-inch segments, and we'll need 2 for each block. You could double your fabric and cut them at the same time. For most of us, that will speed up the process. But the problem with cutting at the same time is if you make a mistake, Nancy,
It's multiplied.
then you have 2 that are not correctly. So you would cut yet another segment here also. And then the last thing is the single strip that is not part of a strip set gets also cut into a 6.5-inch long piece, and that will match up to everything else we've cut.
So the cutting really is, it's not
Very fast.
very fast, but it has the most detail in it. And then to lay it out to see what this looks like, the magic happens.
Right. So here's the components for one block. Here's my center square. There's an edge and corner on each piece. Here's the shorter piece. Here's the longer piece. And then the very last piece that wasn't part of a strip set, that's what creates the frame.
And I have some things stitched together here. You would put, or sew together the right side.
Correct, and we're going to be pressed to the dark on this piece. Down here we're going to press to the dark here. And then over here we actually press to the light fabric because these two seams need to interlock to make a smooth transition for that frame.
And we can show our viewers what Debbie means by this. Pressing is as important as the stitching. And here you've sewn, let's unpin this just a minute so our viewers can see. We've sewn the right side, but then when you meet this together, this is that continuous seam that you want to keep. So here it's been pressed to the light side, which is a little, normally you wouldn't do that. I mean,
right, especially when you're working with very light and very dark. But it is more important that the seam align perfectly.
And because of that staggered seam allowance, it will align.
Right, it's easy to pin together. Sometimes when the seams are so easy to do, we tend to not want to pin them because we can just hold them in place. This is not one of those times. You really do want this to line up, and because you've pressed them as you have, your fingers can feel how it's to go.
Yes, it kind of likes, I like to call it a seam kiss.
Yes.
So here's a block.
There it is.
And it is dramatic. And you're going to see later as we put this together how they can be rotated, they can fit together, and here's how it overlays on.
Although this is slightly different fabrics than what was in those. If we just lay this up, you can see how it could have been a portion of this quilt and how it goes in to that.
Now we have one fabric color combination here.
Yes.
But you're not limited just to one dark, one light, one center section.
Exactly. I wrote the pattern fabric requirements to make it easy for quilters to make a multi-fabric quilt.
Sure.
These are some examples of some beautiful fabrics that could be center squares that would go with anything that we showed you in the main quilt and or the blocks that we showed you earlier. Browns, rusts, oranges, anything. Quilters have often used this project to feature their collection. Everybody has a color collection if you've been around the block a while.
When working together with the darks, they don't have to be all from the same collection.
Correct. And what we're looking at here is 5 possibilities that I would perhaps put into a quilt. And then I brought one that really didn't quite go. It's brown, it's mottled, but it's a little bit lighter than everything else. I wouldn't probably use it unless I added another one.
So if you're going to have something light, then make sure you have 2 of the 5 that way.
Exactly.
And then the lights.
Same concept, Nancy. These are all similar to each other. And then I've also added in one that I probably wouldn't put with this grouping because it's a little green.
Sure. So be cognizant of when you're auditioning fabric, that they blend, but they have a little distinctness.
Right. And I always like to throw in a little pattern. On this one, I've
Sure.
got this little pattern. Over here, I had one that was a little stripy.
So it gives you great versatility in this wonderful pattern. With most quilt designs, there's maybe 1 or perhaps 2 layouts that you can have with a quilt block, but with an asymmetrical block, not so.
Exactly. So we're going to look at just 4 blocks done in a pretty popular colorway. All different center squares, all the same light and the same dark. We're going to put them up showing you just some real easy block rotations that you can do. Nancy's going to put her center squares to the outside on the top. I'm going to put my center square to the inside corner. And then we're going to each do the reverse of that for our second block. Mine is going to go on the outside, hers is on the inside. So this is one section of 4 blocks, and it'll look like this when it's done.
Fun.
This is kind of random for some people, so let's put them in what I call the marching look. And Nancy, if you would rotate your block to the other corner, the inner corner on the left. Now we've got 3 blocks that are going to march in a large 30-block quilt. This would march all the way across diagonally.
Sure. I like it.
Let's turn this one more time and put that in the outside corner, just to give an example of if you decided to put your blocks together, rotate it one more time, Nancy, to the lower corner.
There you go.
Now they get a picture of what might it look like if they end up putting the frames touching each other. An entirely different look. So it really puts each quilter into the design seat for their quilt, which is sometimes not very common.
Right, right. This has such possibilities, and as you saw earlier, some of the quilts, they have movement, and that's what I like about this design.
Exactly.
So rotation and positioning, audition your quilt blocks before you stitch them together. So big quilt blocks are not just for traditional fabrics.
That's right, Nancy.
T-shirt quilts are so popular, and as we mentioned earlier, they're usually one T-shirt pattern after another or panel, but this has great style.
And great movement.
With your T-shirt, you're going to cut it apart down the side seams and add a knit fusible interfacing behind the logo. And the block size stays the same.
It does, and many T-shirt emblems fit beautifully into this 12.5-inch square.
So this ruler helps me get things aligned. This is the 12.5-inch mark. And later you'd go in and use your rotary cutter and ruler after you've marked the corners. So you know what I mean. You'd mark the corners so you know exactly where you would cut the block size.
Exactly.
And you have a block already cut.
We do, and this is also a good time, Nancy, to talk about directionality of your prints. Because as we just showed them, the blocks can be rotated. This is what I will call the orientation of the block throughout your stitching process. But if you look right over here, now the block is in a different corner. So how are you going to decide if you want your blocks to all read right side up? The best way
Yes.
to do it is you go to your design wall, you put your blocks into the position, and then put your bottom and side onto
Sure.
the quilt block as you'll need them. This is actually how you would want this block for this.
Nope, I don't think so. I think
I did
this
it
one.
wrong?
Or
It's
this
that
one.
one? Well, anyway,
Yeah.
so that's how easy it is to make a mistake.
And you can put a block in each of the 4 corners, which this little sample shows.
Exactly, exactly.
So t-shirts, back it with knit interfacing, make sure the orientation is done, and then, even though we're calling this so big blocks, you can also kind of call it kind of big blocks.
Right, exactly. The project also includes a 9-inch version of the big block. It's the exact same stitching. There you go.
Okay.
Slide over a little farther. It's the exact same stitching. Everything is just half size, Nancy, which is a very fun thing to do for smaller projects and also just to mix it up a little. This one is also different for another reason.
2 colors.
It's only 2 colors, 2 beautiful colors, pink and black. But here's a block. It's got a black center. The pink is the light, and now we have a dark frame on it. Right next door, we've got a pink center, a pink frame, and now the dark is touching. So very different in your fabric selection,
Right.
but a lot of really uptown drama.
So you make you make a negative and a positive.
Exactly,
of,
that's what you're doing.
of each of them. So we'll unveil the next option. You saw this quilt earlier when we were discussing the potential that you
For
can work
cutting
with.
up a panel, exactly. And now we're going to show you the panel that it actually came from.
And I'm just going to put it up here because I think you can see that there are 4 different blocks, but look, this is what,
This is how it started. It's a beautiful panel, spiky, long, I call it a radiant star, but how was I going to use that? Let's put it back on the design table and show
Sure.
them some ideas for cutting into a large panel.
and I'll just pull
We
up.
know we're going to be cutting 12.5-inch squares, and oftentimes I spend way more time deciding how I'm going to cut it because there's only one piece of fabric here. So I do preview, okay, if I cut it like that, then I could also cut the other piece like that. I'm going to lose some of my tips, and it's just a matter of going through what are you going to have to cut apart and what are you going to sacrifice, I guess, is what it amounts to.
Now, some panels or squares that are pre-made aren't exactly 12.5 inches.
Exactly. There's oftentimes beautiful printed batik squares, hand-done batik squares, that you have picked up along the way at some great quilt show and looking for a great pattern. This pattern, because it does call for the 12.5-inch square, none of my little batik panels were either
Sure.
the right size, they weren't even all the same size. So I simply added a very small frame or a larger frame, depending upon what it needed, to round them out to 12.5. Could have redrafted the pattern, but that would be crazy.
No,
right?
just add a little frame. Now for some drama for the end, because now you can combine 18-inch squares and 9-inch squares. And tell us about this quilt, Debbie.
This Roses quilt by my friend Heidi Berger is just fabulous, isn't it? It is the same quilt block. She's done it in the 18-inch size and the 9-inch size. She's also changed up some of the fabric combinations, but she used the same Roses fabric throughout the quilt.
As the accent block.
Exactly.
And you can see the 18-inch block with different color borders or strips, frames, and then the 9-inch block. And the layout is so
Right.
wonderful.
It's just very fluid and really makes your eye move across the quilt.
So with a little construction know-how of cutting, stitching, and rearranging the frames around these magnificent focal point blocks, you have many options with Debbie's great design pattern for a quilt. We all love a success story. Today's Nancy's Corner guest and his business partner had a mission to turn textile waste into fair wage job opportunities. They've turned their dream into a business that upcycles clothing and creates jobs with dignity. Please welcome Ross Lohr from Project Repat, who joins us via Skype from Massachusetts. Welcome, Ross.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is a great story, and tell our viewers the history behind Project Repat.
Sure. So I was running a nonprofit organization in East Africa, and I was stuck in this terrible traffic jam. And when we got to the front and finally found out what caused the accident, it was an overturned fruit and vegetable rickshaw, and it was being pushed by a Kenyan man who was wearing a T-shirt that said, "I danced my butt off at Josh's bar mitzvah." So we started thinking about, well, is there some way that we can take all these T-shirts that end up in a place like
Sure.
East Africa and turn them into something else?
And behind you is an example of that.
Yeah, exactly. So behind me is one of the blankets that we were able to make here. Customers send us their T-shirts, and we turn it into something else for them.
And you're located in Massachusetts, which was a textile town many years ago. So
Absolutely.
tell us about how you work with clients to give them a fair wage job.
Yeah, so we have several different production facilities, all based in Massachusetts, all based in the USA. We work up in Lowell with a woman who lost her job working at a textile company, and she's been able to start her own cut and sew company. We work at a nonprofit that employs individuals with disabilities, and we also work in Fall River, Massachusetts, which is a gateway city, a former hub of textile manufacturing here at a lean manufacturing company there. So all of our work is contracted out to those companies.
You're quite an entrepreneur. I mean, it's very
thank you.
clever, very clever. And I was humbled by the fact when you told me how much textile waste is in the stream.
Yeah, I was a little shocked myself to find out that 5% of material waste or trash on Earth is used textiles. And the average American trashes 65 pounds of textiles every year.
Ouch. And so upcycling and using what we have is really so important. And as you mentioned, you work with many at-risk people to help them employ them.
Yeah, we feel like the best thing that we can do is provide people with a job that pays them a fair and living wage to do this kind of work. There's so many individuals out there who know how to cut and sew, and we want to be able to give them jobs and give them the opportunity to make a good living.
And this is a relatively new business. Tell us when this started.
Yeah, so this started, we launched this in March of 2012.
And we're taping this in the end of March, so the end of 2012, excuse me. So in this short time, tell our viewers the number of customers you've had.
Yeah, so we've had more than 3,000 blanket customers in a very short period.
That relates to a lot of textiles that you've kept out of dumpsters.
It does, and it also, I think, tells a story of how people have so many T-shirts that they love and have a lot of memories associated with them, and they want something to do with them, and they want to put them all in one place.
It just is kind of serendipitous, but in today's program we had one little segment of how people can sew with their T-shirts, but if they have so many, this is a great way of having you work with them. And T-shirts aren't the only thing you do.
No, so we'll take flannel shirts, we'll take dress shirts, anything with the fabric that we can sew.
So, what has been your most challenging thing about or time about starting this business?
I think we got a lot of customers really quickly. We, in 1 week we had almost 2,000 customers through a deal we did. And so you're talking about so many boxes of T-shirts coming in through our office every week. And so finding a way to fulfill all of that, keep track of everyone's T-shirts, make sure that they come back in a good amount of time. And we were able to find a lot of great production partners who could really help us out and be able to produce these for us.
Well, Ross, this is an exciting story, and you work with your business partner, Nathan, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you kind of feed things to your cut and sew people, and then you ship them back to the customer.
And we try to make it really easy for our customers too. So when they buy, they get a box with a prepaid envelope in it. So really all they have to do is just put their shirts in, all the shipping's on us, they send it off, and 4 to 6 weeks later, back comes a new blanket made out of their shirt.
Well, thank you for sharing this great story, because it's a great way of people who have sewn for a business now can again sew. You're a great entrepreneur, and I thank you for sharing, and thanks for being with us.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, Nancy.
You're welcome. For those of you who'd like more information on Project Repat, you can go to nancyzieman.com, find all things Sewing with Nancy there. Next week, we'll be back with our second program of Sew Big Quilt Blocks with our guest, Debbie Bowles. Thanks for joining us. Bye for now.
Debbie Bowles has created a pattern that serves as the reference for the big quilt blocks featured in this program. It's $7.99 plus shipping and handling. To order this pattern, call 800-336-8373 or visit our website at sewingwithnancy.com/2701. Order item number MIQ705, BQ Big Quilts Pattern. Credit card orders only. To pay by check or money order, call the number on the screen for details. Visit Nancy's website at nancyzieman.com to see additional episodes, Nancy's blog, and more. Sewing with Nancy, TV's longest airing sewing and quilting program with Nancy Zieman, has been brought to you by Baby Lock, Madeira Threads, Koala Studios, Clover, Amazing Designs, and Class A Needles. Closed captioning funding provided by Oliso. Sewing with Nancy is a co-production of Nancy Zieman Productions and Wisconsin Public Television.